Before we start, quick info in Polish. Słuchajcie, to jest angielska wersja tego odcinka. Wersja polska dla tych, którzy po angielsku nie mówią, pojawi się bardzo niedługo. Niestety nie wyrobiliśmy się na czas, więc jeśli ktoś umie po angielsku, to zapraszamy do wysłuchania w oryginale. Jeśli nie, jutro, najdalej pojutrze będzie wersja z dubbingiem.
Słuchacie podcastu z serii Lewackie Pitolenie.
Witamy wszystkich w ten letni wieczór. Jak słyszycie, jesteśmy na dworze.
Greetings everyone in this summer evening. As you can hear, we are outside. My name is Tomasz Oryński and you are listening to our weekly podcast Lewackie Pitolenie. Many of the listeners ask me about things related to Finnish politics, but I don't know nothing about Finnish politics, so I decided to invite someone who does, a real Finnish person. Let's welcome Atro Tossavainen.
Jest z nami dzisiaj Atro Tossavainen.
Tak.
I'm sorry, I still have problems with pronouncing Finnish surnames. So, we are sitting on the bench outside the building like true Finnish old farts and we are talking about important stuff, about politics.
Rozmawiamy o ważnych rzeczach, o polityce. Atro, in Poland, when people think Finnish politics, the only thing they know is Sanna Marin dancing, Sanna Marin telling Putin to get out of Ukraine, and that you had Finlandization in the past, and that's about it. So, crash course, where do we even start?
Okay, that's basically focusing on the last 5 years or so, first of all, and then focusing on the age-old facts. Mm-hmm. So, one of the crucial things about Finnish politics that everybody seems to not know, and which is to us really important, is that it's such a system with a lot of different entities competing for power that every government ever since times immemorial has needed to be a coalition government, and scoring 20% in an election is considered a landslide victory. So compared to, for example, what you had in Poland over the past 9 years, where essentially one party was in power, that was just something which would be really difficult to happen here because of this thing that we have had this traditional division between the three big parties, the Social Democratic Party, the Centre Party and the Moderate Right Party, which all have shared more or less 20% of the vote. And then a number of smaller parties that can be useful as coalition partners, but that could never be a prime minister party. And of course, more recently, the number of slightly bigger parties that can aspire to this 20% has risen to 4, with the introduction of the True Finns party, which is our response to Prawo i Sprawiedliwość.
Okay, so they are your response to Prawo i Sprawiedliwość, because I think I've seen Prawo i Sprawiedliwość compared to Kokomus before, but maybe before we go to that, maybe let's like spread them out from left to right or from right to left, and tell us who they are. But even before that, tell me, is it true that what is considered to be right in Finland is still very left compared to Polish politics?
In order to answer that question, probably you need to have a good understanding of Polish politics. And despite the fact that I'm married to a Polish woman and have been involved somehow in your political scene in that sense for almost a decade already, I still consider myself a beginning student of these topics. But having said that, the moderate right, aka the National Coalition Party, Kokoomus, as you said, it's, well, as the name says, it's the moderate right party. They've traditionally gone for themes of liberalism, economic conservatism, but social, their views on society have tended more towards the liberal rather than the conservative. So in that
they
sense,
are not like anti-gay, anti-woman rights. They are not this kind of right.
Rather the contrary. They have been fairly progressive in the social sense, traditionally. So it is only fairly recently that there has been a party of any significance that has pushed the social conservatism topics.
Which will be the True Finns.
Which is the True Finns party.
Okay, so let's start with them. Where they are coming from and...
Okay. Approximately in the beginning of the 70s, a guy branched out from, I seem to remember, the Centre Party of the time, which was known as the Agricultural Alliance in the early days. Well, early as in 50-ish years ago. And he founded the Party of the Finnish Countryside, literally Suomen maaseudun puolue. And their central tenets were the fight against the elite and of trying to weed out crime in politics, corruption in politics and so on. And they were a minority party. They rarely scored more than 5%. I'd really need to check up on this, but they were not a political force to be reckoned with. They were basically the dog that kept barking and making noise, and sort of kept everyone else on their toes. But they didn't really have a significant position by any means. Okay, so come the 90s, the Finnish Agricultural Party handled its property poorly and went bankrupt. And on the grave of the old Agricultural Party, a new one was founded, the True Finns, which retains this name to the day, whose political themes were supporting the average ordinary person, and social conservatism, but in a... I'd really need to go back and check more on that, because we're talking about the time when I was 20 years old, and I wasn't quite as clued up on politics as I may be these days, which is still not a lot. But anyway, they were running on themes of supporting the small person against the elites, just as
what every other right-wing populist party does.
Well, they were doing that kind of right-wing populism, but it wasn't markedly anti-anything. It wasn't even anti-immigrant at the time. It wasn't really a big theme in our society at the time. They were running on this theme of trying to fight corruption in politics and the power of the elites. And maybe because of the leader, Timo Soini, who is a guy who is special in the Finnish sense in that he's a Catholic, which is a very small minority here, but for some reason he became one voluntarily in his adulthood, and maybe that affected his political thinking and his positions on various matters in society somewhat, but still they were not campaigning on traditional Catholic themes such as anti-abortion, anti-gay or anything like that, but maybe it's informed his political thinking to some extent. Okay, so fast forward 10-15 years, and the Populist Party started to run on an anti-immigrant platform. And of course, in the beginning of the 90s, Finland saw a significant flux of immigration from Somalia, and it started to be more normal to see people who didn't look like you and me on the streets. And then, of course, somebody needed to run on a platform opposing that, and that's where they found their niche. And now they are milking that niche for all of its worth.
Are they pro-Russian, or is anyone in Finland pro-Russian?
It's very difficult for anyone to be pro-Russian in Finland because of obvious reasons. Everybody remembers very well what happened 80-90 years ago, and to be openly pro-Russian would be a suicide.
Okay, let me rephrase it, because in any country, from Britain, Slovakia, Poland, any country in Europe, it's very common that right-wing parties are funded directly or indirectly by Russia. That happened in Poland, that happened with Brexit, AfD in Germany, and Marine Le Pen in France.
we had a kind of a different political history because after the Second World War, we remained politically neutral. We didn't ally ourselves, obviously, with the West nor with the East. We were not a part of the NATO. We were not part of the Warsaw Pact. Our political independence was not significantly hijacked by anyone. But of course, this was a sensitive balance, and we were paying more attention to ideas that were coming from the East than we perhaps should have. And we have this concept of the Paasikivi, former president, Kekkonen, another former president, the line of thinking, which emphasized maintaining these stable and respectful but not subdued, for lack of a better word, relations with Russia, Soviet Union at the time. And of course, as a part of this, there was it was of course legal for a communist party to exist, and at some points during the 60s and 70s they even made it into the government occasionally. But the Communist Party also had these internal disputes. Some of them were pro-communism as a political ideology. Some of them were openly pro-Russian, pro-Soviet. And some of them had this idea that eventually Finland should become a communist country along the same lines as the other countries that were either taken into the Warsaw Pact or directly subsumed into the Soviet Union. That never happened, but there were parties that were openly collaborating with the Soviet Union and openly funded by the Soviet Union as well. But ever since the Soviet Union disbanded, and ever since the Russia that we know today more or less started to exist, it would be very difficult to think that anybody in the Finnish political scene would accept funding from the Russians.
Because even if they did it secretly, if that came out, they finished, basically.
More or less, yes. Yeah.
Okay, so moving a bit to the left, the next ones will be the kokoomus, yeah?
Well, in the current combination of the parliament, the True Finns are considered to be the furthest to the right party. And then you have a number of parties who are also on the right sector of politics, if you will. There is the National Coalition, aka Kokoomus, the moderate right party, which, as described previously, is running on a platform of economic conservatism but progressive on social matters. There's the Christian Democrats. They are a fringe party. They are basically the equivalent of, I don't know, whichever party that puts religion at the forefront of their politics and their conservative interpretation of Christianity.
So it's some like some rights from America, for example.
Yeah, but it's kind of different because, again, they may be socially conservative, but economically you might think of them as more progressive because, they have these ideas that somehow stem from Christianity of supporting the not-so-well-to-do people.
Oh, yeah. So not like in America then, definitely.
Not like, it's very difficult to contrast American politics with Finnish. There are so many things that just don't work the same way.
But the Kokoomus, are they coalition? They are part of this coalition? No, they are...
No, the National Coalition is the name of the party. And it is this moderate right party which has enjoyed a constant more or less 20% plus minus.
So this Christian fringe people, they have nothing to do with them. They are separate entity.
They are a separate party, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
You have the Swedish Folk Party, which is special in the sense that they don't really have a political ideology. Left, right, liberal, conservative, they're all good with that as long as the position of the Swedish language is assured.
So they are like Polish PSL, they are happy to go to coalition with everyone as long as they can
it's important
keep
for them,
finger on the...
Yeah, exactly. It's important for them to maintain a position in the government and be a part of almost any government imaginable in order to ensure the rights of the Swedish-speaking population. But they are generally seen as more right-wing than left-wing, more liberal than conservative on the social matters, though.
But they are not the three and recently four main ones you mentioned. So of the four main ones we had from the right, the True Finns, then we had the Kokoomus.
The True Finns, the moderate right, then there's the Centre Party, which used to be the Agricultural Alliance.
But not the one that went bankrupt, that's a different one.
No. The predecessor to the True Finns, the party of the Finnish countryside, quite literally, they went bankrupt, which led to the formation and eventual rise of the True Finns. But
so what's the Finnish name of those?
Keskus. The Finnish name for the Centre Party, Keskusta.
Literally which is
center. And they are economically conservative-ish and socially kind of, well, in the center. Not terribly progressive, but not overly conservative either.
But I would like to remind our listeners that the Finnish center is probably somewhere where Partia Razem is in Poland. So.
This I couldn't tell you.
But it's much more to the left than what we understand in Poland, that's for sure.
Yeah. And then to the left of the Centre Party we have the Social Democrats, who are like economically how to put this in a way that Polish listeners would understand, it's difficult to say. They are not advocating the state takeover of the economy, that's for sure. They are advocating for a recognized and strong position of the unions, the trade unions within society, and for state oversight in matters related to economy, but still, of course, recognizing the fact that businesses, enterprises, entrepreneurs are needed to keep the economy
so for
running.
the Polish listener, they are extremely communist, like straight from North Korea, and they want the world to fall apart.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. And socially progressive, supporting women's rights, workers' rights, LGBT rights, immigrants' rights.
And that was the party that Sanna Marin was from?
Yeah, this is Sanna Marin's party.
And the current Prime Minister?
Petteri Orpo is from the National Coalition, the moderate right.
The Kokoomus.
Yes.
Okay, are there any smaller parties that are still worth mentioning, or
there's
mentioned?
The Greens, which is running on an environmentalist platform and putting the preservation of the environment ahead of economy, and of course very liberal, very progressive on the social matters.
Are Finnish Greens also anti-nuclear, like German Greens?
They used to be, but they've recently had a change of heart.
Well, after seeing what the Germany did, probably.
Well, after seeing what Germany did is one thing, but also after seeing that we had this dependency on fossil fuels that everybody else has, and where our fossil fuels were coming from.
Yeah.
And
I can guess they weren't coming from San Marino.
They weren't coming from San Escobar either.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were importing coal, we were importing oil products of all kinds. We were importing natural gas from the obvious places.
Yeah.
Not that much to the west of us, but rather the opposite.
Yeah. I heard there's this joke about Finnish military exercises that they always practice how to defend from the enemy that it's coming from the east. And when someone once proposed that they maybe should practice from the enemy coming from the west, everyone thought that it's a great joke and then went to the business as usual. So
I didn't attend the service myself, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. Okay, but there's one more thing I wanted to ask you, because you got really strong trade unions, and I'm, for example, told that my trade union, the drivers and transport trade union, is actually a significant political power as well, even though they are not acting as a party. They got a great influence. So how that works? Is that because of...
Our labor legislation is relatively laissez-faire, if you will. It doesn't really touch upon many things that are legislated in other countries, and a lot of stuff is left to be decided in this tripartite conglomeration that is made up of the government, the employers' unions, and the employees' unions. Wages, conditions of work, terms of holidays, terms of sick leaves, and stuff like that.
So to explain, for example, there is no minimum wage as such.
Strangely enough, there is no minimum wage.
Yeah, so every industry sits down and agrees
on the wages for that industry. And then if you're, for example, if you're working in transport as yourself, the transport union has negotiated with the employers in this branch the terms and conditions of work. And then when enough of the employees are represented by the union, the contracts, the social contracts that they make become binding upon all of the society, including the employers who were not part of the employers union. They are nonetheless legally required to abide by the same terms.
So the power of trade unions comes from like the popular power. There's so many people in the union that if they go for strike, the country agrees to halt, basically.
Yeah. The fact that when you have a membership in the union that is more than half of the workforce in the business, then that becomes generally binding. Those contracts, those agreements, collective agreements that the unions draft between each other, those become generally binding upon the whole industry. And it doesn't help the employer to say that we don't want to be a part of the employers union, we don't want to abide by these contracts, we want to set our own rates, and everybody else goes not so fast, because we have these generally binding contracts that were negotiated among a majority of the business, and you need to do this.
Yeah, even if you cannot bring like workers from abroad to work half price, you still would have to pay them.
No, the workers from abroad need to be paid local rates.
Yeah. Okay, so now if you can tell us where we are politically, because as you said, Finland was trying to sit a bit on the fence. You were trying to be neutral, and thanks to the guy from not the West, you are now with us in NATO and everything. Are Finns happy about that?
Yes, overwhelmingly yes. Because of course for the longest time we tried to balance on this fence, not falling too far into the east or the west. But then when the current aggression, the war started in February 2022, I seem to remember that it was even our president at the time, Sauli Niinistö, who said that the masks have been ripped off now and we know exactly what's going on. And that was the impetus. Like, Putin has been the biggest NATO salesman of the year.
That's true.
Yeah. And Finland and Sweden, which had remained neutral for 80 plus years, ever since the current alliances were formed after the Second World War, finally decided to seek membership. And at the time, the Green Party suddenly figured out that nuclear power is actually greener than Russian fossil fuels, and that membership in NATO was suddenly agreed to by the Social Democratic Party, by the Left Alliance, another party that I failed to mention just a moment ago, which is basically further left than the Social Democrats. And even though nobody is currently advocating for state takeover of the economy, maybe they're a little further there. So I'd say, knowing what little I know, that's basically Razem.
Okay, because that's something I've read. So let me clarify that as we came back to this like party spectrum. So I'm taught like SDP, the Social Democratic Party, when everyone abroad thinks, oh, that's Sanna Marin, she's young and whatever. But actually, it's the party mostly of like old farts. And this like Left Democratic Alliance or something, it's left more like Razem.
Well, Left Alliance is more like the young people's, like idealistic left, Razem kind of stuff. And Social Democrats tended
more like
to be
SLD party.
And it tended to be the party of the old blokes from the unions. Heavy industries, definitely very well represented there. and male-dominated. But somehow, during the previous term of government, things turned around in a very unexpected way, and it became the fashionable party of young women.
So as on this, you've seen this Finnish political compass meme with all the Moomins, probably.
I may have missed that. Go on
Okay,
then.
I show it later,
Yeah.
but then we maybe put it on the cover. So basically the young ones will be where the Snufkin is, and the SDP will be when Moomin Mama is, because they are more classical left. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and what about the European Union? This is not as popular as NATO, I reckon. Of course,
We
still
joined. Yeah, we had the referendum to join the EU in the summer of 1994, so 30 years ago already, and it was won by a fairly tight margin. I seem to remember something like 54% to 46%. But I think the popularity of the EU may have grown ever since, because the fact that there was this situation where international billionaire investors were playing the Finnish currency because it was small enough that an individual could play it and basically wreck the Finnish economy just like that. And the only way out of that was to become a part of
Eurozone.
a major currency that is harder for an individual to f*** with, if you'll
Yeah, we are
Apologize.
freedom of speech podcast.
apologize for my French. Anyway, so I'd say that the nation has, by and large, seen the benefits of being able to trade freely without red tape with 27 other countries in the region, especially importantly Germany, France and Poland, the three major economies in Central Europe. And of course UK until recently.
Yeah.
We always had the Nordic cooperation between Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark and Iceland, but this is economically maybe not so significant because these are all small countries. Even Sweden, which has only 10 million people, well, that's still twice as large as us, but it's not a large country even in European terms.
But in general, Finland is like seeing it from Poland. It's like a socialist paradise because everything works and you pay higher taxes, but you see where the money goes and everything. I see your face now, but I'm talking from the Polish perspective, and I see people who saying, "Oh no, we cannot spend too much because we are going in debt and everything." But if you compare Finnish economy to other major economies in Europe, you are not that much in debt as other countries, I would say, compared to Belgium, for example.
Well, there are these countries in Central Europe that have made being head over heels in debt somehow a trademark of the whole country for years and years. So in that sense, we may be in a slightly better situation, but I think our politicians, especially the current ones, the moderate right-led government, are worried and not completely without legitimacy about the idea that our economy is not on an upward trend at the moment. We struggle with the same issues of population as everybody else. The birth rates are down, people are living longer than before, the population pyramid is not so thin at the top end anymore and not so wide at the bottom end as it should be. And
So some changes will be expected.
some changes will be somehow necessary because we'll need to be able to take care of our elderly going forward, and there will be more and more of them and fewer of the people who are actually funding this with work. And our economy is so small that we enjoyed a brief period of international boost at the time when Nokia was the number one in mobile phones, and then it was a major hit that only this one business had a bad turn. And that kind of stuff just shouldn't happen. One business shouldn't be able to make or break a whole country, and that's something that we also need to work on. making our economy more resilient, more like standing on multiple feet rather than just this one enormous leg.
Okay, but I want to take a step back now and look at the wider picture, because I've noticed that as general, Finland is a funny example to speak with right-wing people, because they say, like social democracy is only possible with like oil-rich countries, and you're like tree-rich mostly, and that's it.
Finland has never had oil riches, and somehow we've been able to make the social democracy thing work for 80-ish years already.
Yeah, but it seems to me it works because you don't believe in this crap with like trickle-down economy. You rather help people at the bottom to get up than people at the top, and then expect them to somehow trickle down. I want to give you an example I had recently. Someone pulled out my old Twitter feed in which I told how like Britain treats people when I had an accident after being in Scotland for 2 years, and I've been actually left to my own device because nobody cares, because I've been in Britain for 2 weeks, too short to get full 2 years to be entitled to any benefits or something. And now I'm in Finland here. I worked not even a full 12 months yet, and I'm now on benefits, and the state supports me, and trade union as well, for getting some language qualifications and so on. And I openly talk about that, even though I've been initially like shy to talk about it, because I still feel a bit guilty. I just came to the country and I'm getting now benefits, but all the Finns whom I speak with, they're like, no, this is for you, this is for help. Like nobody tells you tells you are a benefit scrounger or something which you will be hearing all the time in Britain. Probably they do, but maybe not in your face. But I met plenty of people who said, oh yeah, we are proud of that, we are doing it right and everything. So I can see that this mentality is completely different to the British one.
But we have a conflicting mentality with respect to these things, because you get any amount of people who are thinking and saying it out loud that some people on benefits are benefits scroungers. So who are these other people, and why, for example, yourself, you would not be grouped in with that same lot? I don't know. Well, I have a nasty idea about that, and it has to do with the fact that you are European. And sad to say, but the true Finns and their supporters seem to think that anybody on benefits who doesn't look like you and me is automatically a benefits scrounger.
So that was about to be a next question, but let's cut to this. Is racism in Finland a big thing?
I don't know how big is big, but it's definitely a thing that exists. And as I mentioned earlier that in the beginning of the 90s, when Somalia had this civil war and a lot of people went out of the country to be refugees, some of them came to Finland, and this was a major cultural shock both to them as well as to us. And you would have expected somehow that we would have gotten used to the idea about 10 years previous, when the boat refugees from Vietnam came to various countries, including Poland and including Finland. But somehow the Somali people's entry into our consciousness was a much bigger thing. And we're kind of reaping the benefits, if you will, not that there are any, of that ever since, with respect to this racism idea.
Yeah, but you probably know who I have in my mind now, who is also quite white, and he can't stop ranting about how racist and discriminative against foreigner Finland is.
Yeah, but it's kind of funny because we're talking about a mutual friend of ours, and he looks like you and me, comes from a Central European country, and has taken the cause of the black people upon himself, even though it doesn't directly affect him. And even if we were to treat people of a different appearance much better, which we of course should, that might not help him in any way whatsoever, because obviously he doesn't belong to the group of black people. So maybe we should just generally treat everyone better which would be a noble goal, and I much support that. Can't say that I would oppose that, but yeah, we keep hearing about how black people don't get opportunities to do this and that. We recently had a conversation where it was pointed out that the board of a trade union only contains native Finns. But then again, in order to get to the board of a nationwide organization like that, you start at the bottom. You start to work in the industry. You get involved with the trade union activity at your workplace. Eventually you run for your local branch. Eventually you run for the county, kind of like parliament, equivalent of parliament. Forget the word, but it should be a proper word. And eventually, out of those slightly smaller administrative organizations, the nationwide board is formed. And I pointed out that the county-wide municipal parliament, if you will, for this trade union organization contained a non-zero number, maybe not a whole lot of people, but a non-zero number of people who, judging by their names, came from various African countries. And it's like, eventually they will make it to the board. But it doesn't happen immediately. You don't take someone out of the woods and put them in a position in your government or in a board of an organization. They start at the bottom, just like you and I would start at the bottom when we got out of school and got into our first workplaces. And eventually we might become somebody in those organizations.
Yeah, I guess we can look at Britain and see how long it took for this country to get the Indian Prime Minister, for example. So,
yeah. The independence of India happened in 1948.
Yeah.
And in 2023, they got a Prime Minister who is of Indian descent.
Yeah, and similarly in Scotland with Humza Yousaf, who is no longer, but he was.
Yeah, I remember.
And they are both born in Britain already.
Yeah,
so,
born and educated in Britain.
Yeah.
They went to the same fancy schools as Boris Johnson and Liz Truss did.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to politics. So with this new government, there will be a little shift towards the more liberal and less socialist politics.
I would actually look at it from a completely different perspective. Okay. So the previous government, which was a coalition government between 5 parties, they had the Social Democrats, the Centre Party, the Swedish Party, the Left Alliance and the Greens. It was definitely on the liberal and progressive side of social issues. And the current one has 4 parties. They have the Christian Democrats, conservative socially, but perhaps more progressive economically. They have the Swedish Folk Party, who are okay with any kind of politics as long as the position of the Swedish language is guaranteed. They have the Moderate Right Party, and they have the True Finns Party, which is economically undecided but socially extremely regressive. And it's a bit like the situation in Sweden, where the Moderate Right Party is the Prime Minister party and technically in charge, but they have to rely on the support from Sverigedemokraterna, the Swedish far-right party, who are not a member of the government, but who agreed to support the government in exchange for something. In our case, the far-right Finnish party is an actual member of the government, but of course, in order for the stuff that the moderate right wants to push through and succeed, they must rely on the support from all of their coalition partners. So in return, the coalition partners must get something, which forces the moderate right to support socially regressive moves from the True Finns as well.
Yeah, but in general, because it's all requires compromise, it's not the end of the world.
It's not the end of the world, but then again, traditionally the far-right parties have not done compromise very well. It's just not in their DNA. And it's interesting to see whether this government will actually survive the full 4 years. What happened during the previous term of government from 2015 to 19 is that the previous incarnation, if you will, of the True Finns was one of the three parties in government. They had the Centre Party, which was the Prime Minister Party. They had the National Coalition, Kokoomus, and they had the True Finns. And in the middle of the term, the True Finns had a change of direction. They had their party annual general meeting, which elected a new chairman. The old chairman was moved to the side and ended up founding his own new party. And the new True Finns took a decided step towards the traditional issues of the far right, the anti-immigrant platform. The previous branch had been kind of moderately anti-immigrant-ish, but they didn't make it a center point of their politics. The current True Finns party is first and foremost anti-immigrant, and they don't really have another issue. They don't have many views on social politics. They don't have many issues on economic politics. They have one issue, and that is resisting immigration.
Okay, but I'm a bit confused here, because right-wing parties are just growing by splitting. So this True Finns party that it's now in government is the True Finns party that remained after electing this new leader,
yes.
Or it's the one that branched off? No,
it's the one that remained after electing the new leader, and the splinter group that couldn't take the new chairman formed its own party, remained in government without a popular mandate because the Centre Party Prime Minister didn't want to break up the government. And in the following parliamentary elections, they failed to get any places in the parliament at all. So basically, they died off.
Okay.
And they are no longer a force to be reckoned with at all. They just died out.
Okay, so one more question now of the current things, because you recently had a new president, which I've seen on social media was making a noise because he smiles at his official portrait picture, which is, I'm told, unfinished thing to do. But apart from that, can we speak about him and about his president as well?
Yeah. This is, politically speaking, this is not terribly interesting because the power that the Finnish president has, politically speaking, is very restricted. The president is in charge of jointly managing foreign policy together with the government. And as in your case, as in Poland, the president signs new acts into law.
Does he have veto rights?
But they don't have a veto right in the sense that if the president fails to sign a bill into law, the parliament will reapprove it using exactly the same wording, and it will become law nonetheless. So the president's signature is more of it's an artifact. It's a technical remnant formality of old times.
So they don't even need a bigger majority. They can just revote it with the same words, same number.
If the parliament revotes an act that the president has failed to sign, then it becomes law nonetheless.
Okay, and is there a time frame for him to sign?
I seem to remember that there is. Couldn't tell you what it is without checking, but yeah.
Okay, so he's basically cutting ribbons and
he's basically a ceremonial. He's a ceremonial figure. What is somewhat important is that he's the first president that comes out of the Swedish-speaking minority of the country in 90 years. So in that sense, he's different. But other than that, he's part of the established politics. He served as prime minister 10-ish years ago. He's been involved for a long time, and recently he took a break out of politics and went to be a professor in an economic university somewhere in Italy, I seem to remember. But yeah, I could have thought of both better guys from my perspective, but also I could have thought of a number of worse guys to become president, and I don't really mind at all. One of the things that we have taken issue with, and I seem to get the understanding that you take issue with as well, is the ability of the president to have a conversation in a foreign language. And in that respect, we've never had a guy who is as competent as Alexander Stubb.
Yeah, he has a British wife as well.
He has a British wife. He studied abroad. He speaks English without fault. He speaks excellent French. he speaks native levels. Well, he is a Swedish speaker natively.
But he also speaks Finnish,
He
obviously.
also speaks perfectly native level Finnish, even though Swedish is his mother tongue. But he speaks at least these 4 languages to very high standards of proficiency, and a couple of others as well. So in that sense, you're going to have this like figure head of state who's going to go around and meet other people from other countries, have conversations with them, and to be able to do so without needing to resort to the use of interpreters.
Okay, so basically this is boring. He is okay, and the previous one was respected as well, from what I gather. So
Yeah, they both come from the same party, this National Coalition Moderate Right Party. But another quirk of the Finnish presidency is that you drop your party alliances the moment you are elected.
that's in theory happens in Poland.
Well, in theory it does, but in our case it seems to be taken seriously.
Okay, now there's one thing that I think we still need to explain. How Åland fits in all of that.
Åland Islands.
Yeah.
We need to take back 100 years in history. And after the First World War, the League of Nations was formed. And the League of Nations was somehow dealing with the question of what to do with Åland Islands, whether it should be independent, whether it should be a part of Sweden, whether it should be a part of Finland. And somehow they came to this current idea that it should be administratively a part of Finland, but with a high degree of autonomy and being a demilitarized zone as well. So young men from the Åland Islands are not required to perform the compulsory military service, and there are no forces stationed on the islands. And there cannot be any forces stationed on the islands according to current law.
So they have their own parliament, I guess.
They have their own.
Are they kind of like Scotland in?
They are kind of like Scotland. They're kind of like, they have their devolved government, but they also send one member to the Finnish parliament.
Which has how many members?
200.
Okay, so not that much as Scotland does.
No, 0.5% of the parliament comes from Åland Islands. They are entitled to this one place.
Okay. And he's still elected there, or he's like appointed?
He or she is elected by the local population.
And so they got like they separate those, but they are still like European Union members. Everything Schengen.
They are under the legislative authority of Finland, but they have a degree of autonomy, like how they want to run their own show, despite this.
I'm just trying to like compare it. So, like within the picture of European Union, are they like Scotland, or are they like Isle of Man, for example, which is also crown dependency, but it's not European Union?
They are definitely more like Scotland in that sense. They are part of the European.
Scotland used to be.
Yeah. Well, obviously.
Yeah.
They are part of the European Union, and they are part of Finland, and everything that goes in Finland, like all Finnish laws are valid there.
So they have no like their own foreign policy or everything. They just are self-governing on the islands, and that's it.
But in local matters, they have their own authority.
Yeah. Their own police force and everything as well?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, really last question now, because we have to speak about this popular person. Does Sanna Marin, was she popular in Finland as much as she was popular in Europe, or not really?
I'd have to get a feel for the European popularity in order to compare those two. But yeah, she was fairly popular among certain circles here. Of course, you're looking at the people who are socially progressive and economically maybe more left-wing than right-wing, but more than anything socially progressive, like in favor of women's rights, workers' rights, LGBT rights, immigrants' rights, all the things that the Social Democratic Party stands for. And then you're looking at the old men who are worried that the young women will take over and you and I will no longer be needed for anything. I'm like, go girl.
Yeah, but also I think she did well when it comes to COVID or the Russian situation. And
as far as I can tell, I much prefer the previous government to the one that we had before that, or the one that we now have. But then again, we are here because this is the Levatsky Epitolenie.
yeah, but also she's now working for Tony Blair, which is a bit of shady thing to do, I would say.
Well, she's no longer in politics, so you drop out of politics, you find yourself a new job.
Yeah, but
And as far as I'm concerned, it's none of my business.
yeah, but does it mean you think she's gone from politics for good and she will be
I
just
have
a
no
consultant?
idea. I have no idea. Maybe she will return, maybe she won't. Maybe she
So
had enough.
it doesn't burst bridges for her that she goes and works for basically a war criminal. Yeah?
I couldn't have an opinion on the internal goings-on of the Social Democratic Party. I'm not in there.
Yeah.
But as far as I can tell from the general atmosphere, there's nothing that says that, no, she can never come back to the politics of the country if she wishes to.
Yeah, or maybe she will somehow filters to some international institutions as well.
There's international institutions you can work for. There's EU-wide institutions you can work for, if you like, if that's your thing. Local politics is yet another option. Or maybe she will just stay as a former prime minister of a country that nobody has ever heard of.
Yeah.
And make the speaking rounds and make great money there.
Good for her, I guess.
Yeah, good for her, difficult to say. But I don't think, to answer your question, I don't think that this burned any bridges for her locally.
Okay, so is there anything I should have asked and I didn't? Is there anything important you think we still should know?
I don't think there is. I think we've covered the peculiarities of our parliamentary system. The fact that there is only a single cabinet, and the fact that it's a country of compromises and coalition governments always has been, probably always will be, never say never, but it seems likely that because of this division to the supporters of various parties, 20% being the landslide victory, that we have enjoyed a period of relative lack of unrest, for a better word, political stability, compromises and moderate politics for a long time. And I would kind of hope that even with the popularity of the local far-right party growing, it's still a case where if they can't score more than 20%, they will always be forced to seek coalitions with the other parties, just like every other party always has had to do. And either they will learn and become more or less a respectable, subdued party like everybody else, or they will not, and they will be relegated to the position that the Sverigedemokraterna has in Sweden, this far-right party that gets a lot of votes but that nobody wants to go into coalition with. So kind of left on the sidelines despite everything. So I don't know, both are technically possible. Remains to see how it goes.
As a lefty, you could see things being better, but you are not too worried about what's going on.
I think that the coalition and compromise nature of our politics saves us from a lot of very abrupt movements to any direction. And I would like to see that continue, irrespective of who's in power, who the actual parties are. The fact that everybody needs to compromise and look for common points in their policies and agree on the handling of differences, that we might be better equipped to deal with problems in that sense than your average one-party country.
Okay, so thank you for all these explanations.
I hope it was useful. Thank you for interviewing me.
I think it was definitely interesting and much more than I could ever say. So I hope the listeners could find it interesting as well.
You'll have to interview a real politician next.
Maybe, yeah, if they want to talk with us. But meanwhile, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Our guest was Atro Tossavainen.
That's right.
I'm sorry, because I'm so struggling with Finnish. I still cannot learn 8 and 6 numbers. I don't know. So apologies for mispronouncing in the beginning, and see you.
You did fine. Thank you.
See you around, and to our listeners, see you next week.